If you want to learn a new language but you're not even sure what an adjective is, never mind how tones work, well, I'm about to make it all very simple for you. Let's break it down. Every sentence in existence can be broken down into various word types. Nouns, pronouns, prepositions, and so on. They are all called parts of speech. This sentence I'm saying right now, well, it's full of parts of speech. There are 8 main ones in English, but some languages have more. In fact, some word types are pretty exclusive to languages like Mandarin Chinese, and knowing how all the parts fit together will help you understand what the heck is going on in your language lessons. You are a noun, I am a noun, Aquaman is a noun, and so is this gold-coated spider. Spider and the gold. Nouns are people, places, and things, but not all things are visible. Air is a thing, but you can't see it, unless that is you happen to have this microscope handy. Same with abstract things like fear and love, also nouns. A noun can even be a concept or a theory. Gravity, freedom, string theory.
It's a string. How hard can it be? It's straight, it's in a loop, it gets knotted up with other strings.
Now, certain nouns get capital letters. Things with names like Ferrari, Sunday, or Vancouver. These are known as proper nouns. The rest, like spiders and gold, are common nouns. Some languages, like German and Luxembourgish, give every noun a capital letter, which is very weird to the English eye, while Italian, for example, doesn't capitalize a whole bunch of things that we might. Bravery is a noun too, and if you're feeling brave, hit that like and subscribe button too so I can send you more awesome videos just like this. And don't forget to click that bell. Say we are chatting about Johnny. Well, without pronouns, talking about Johnny will soon start sounding quite ridiculous. I'm going to have to keep repeating Johnny's name every time I mention Johnny. That would be annoying. So instead, we use words like he and she, him, her, they, and it, although probably not all for Johnny at the same time. These are pronouns, and they stand in for other nouns when we don't want to keep repeating a thing's name. Now, of course, for the sentence to work, it must be obvious who or what the pronoun is referring to. Now, these words, he and she, his and hers, they are known as gender words. And in English, nouns referring to people are the only nouns that have gender. But in languages like Portuguese and French, all nouns have a gender. It's one of the first things you'll notice when you want to learn any of these bad boys. It actually has nothing to do with natural gender, though. They are just grammatical categories. And then, of course, you have languages like German or Russian with the third gender, which is called neuter. What is a verb indeed? Well, you better listen up. A noun needs a verb like a bicycle needs a peddler. Without pedaling, that bike ain't going anywhere. Verbs tell you what the subject of the sentence is doing or being, and there are 2 types of these verbs, action and non-action verbs. Action verbs say what something is doing, riding a bike, painting a tiger, seeing a spider. Non-action verbs, on the other hand, describe what something is. It can be a state of being, an emotion, a possession, or an opinion. Aquaman is in the water. I have a mountain bike. The spider feels awkward. Verbs are actually the main building blocks of a sentence because you really can't talk about anything without using those verbs, not even in sign language. The tricky thing about verbs is knowing their tense, past, present, future, and everything in between. Tenses tell us where the verb's action fits on a timeline. It's easy enough in English, you might think, but many languages have a rather astonishing array of endings that you can tack onto a verb depending on who did the action and when it took place. And that's what verb conjugation is all about, choosing the right tense for the right verb. And trust me, it can vary drastically across languages. Never mind that, some languages let you add all kinds of prefixes and suffixes to a verb and you end up with a whole new meaning. Want to see what Turkish can do? Try this on for size. Also, most verbs follow a set of rules, but just about every single language has a few irregular verbs that like to break the rules and make you sweat. It's like dealing with a bunch of different accents. Wait a minute, what are accents exactly? We'll get to that one a little bit later on. Here is a woman. Great. Noun, right? But what if you wanted to describe her? Say what kind of woman she is. A wild woman, a brilliant woman, a dangerous woman. Now we're getting interesting. These describing words are called adjectives. Adjectives make nouns sound less boring because they make its meaning more precise. A dark forest, a sweltering day, a riveting book. In English, the adjective comes before the noun. An awesome video, a handsome presenter. You get the idea. But in other languages, the adjective can come after the noun. The forest dark, the day sweltering, a book riveting. You can see those particular examples in Spanish right here. Adjectives are important. If your favorite author stopped using adjectives, their writing would feel very, very different. Although, if you want a completely unsolicited writing tip here, most authors actually tend to overuse adjectives. It's a good exercise next time you're writing anything to try and strip back your adjectives and let the rest of the words do the work. Having said that, I do tend to actually put quite a lot of adjectives in my books of short stories because, well, you're there to learn, aren't you? Why should only nouns get interesting descriptions? Never fear, we can also describe verbs, and luckily we have adverbs for that job. He strums his guitar softly. Strums is the verb, but softly describes how he does it. He does it softly. So if that's an adverb, pretty easy to remember. Since it sounds like add and verb, it adds to the verb. You're not going to forget that one, are you? On the bike, behind the trees, over the moon, prepositions tell you where something is, when something is, or even the direction of something. In other words, prepositions tell you about the relationship between two things in a sentence. See how a good sentence needs prepositions? And they almost always come before a noun, which is why they're called prepositions. Languages like Turkish and Hungarian actually call them postpositions because they come after the noun. Pretty badass. Badass, of course, being an adjective, of course. And, or, but, yet. Conjunctions are the glue of your sentences. They link all the words, phrases, and clauses together so everything you say sounds nice and flowing. Without conjunctions, we couldn't build complex sentences, and commas would be pretty much out of a job. So they're pretty straightforward, really. Every time you yell or swear or even just say, hey, you're probably using interjections. An interjection is an exclamation of surprise or excitement or anger, and it doesn't really have any grammatical meaning on its own. It kind of interrupts the sentence, but it shows the speaker's emotion. Do all languages do this? Of course they do. Article is just a fancy word for a, an, and the. A bear, an igloo, the sun. They're called also determiners because they determine exactly what noun you're referring to. This specific thing here or this type of thing. So can you believe the word the doesn't actually exist in Latin where so many of our languages came from, and many other languages don't use articles at all. And then of course comes along a language like French, which just seems to have a bit of a thing for articles. If you have a noun in French, there is virtually always an article in front of it, and there are different ones for masculine and feminine words, and each one also has a plural version. Welcome to the world of Romance languages.
What?
To be more polite, the guys should end with the krab and girls should end with ka. Sawadee krab, sawadee ka.
Thai people from Thailand that is, always seem to end their sentences like this, and now you know why.
Sawadee ja, sawadee ha, wadee krab, wadee ka, wadee ha, wadee ja.
These little politeness word things at the end of sentences are called particles. They are little markers that help to give context to the other words around them. And in languages like Chinese and Japanese, they're a really, really big deal. But particles aren't always about politeness. That's just one kind. For example, a very common Japanese particle is wa, and it tells you what the topic of the sentence is. So here it shows that I'm talking about myself, and here it shows that I'm talking about the teacher. Pretty cool, right? Another example of a particle is the Japanese ka. If you add it to the end of a sentence, it turns that sentence into a question, just like that. This is an actual poem in Mandarin Chinese. I kid you not. Okay, so you know how your voice goes up at the end of a sentence when you're asking a question? If you didn't change the pitch of your voice, the listener might not realize you'd asked a question in the first place. Well, many of the world's languages take this way further than we do in English. They use sound patterns called tones to differentiate the actual meaning of words. So if you use the wrong tone, you're saying the wrong word. In Mandarin, the most famous example is in this syllable here, because it can mean mother, hemp, horse, or scold, depending on which of the four Mandarin tones you say it with. How about that poem then, this time in English? So are tones important? Yes, they are extremely important. Don't be that stereotypical English-speaking person learning a tonal language who thinks that they can just do without the tones. They are not optional. Tones are just as integral to the meaning of a word as the pronunciation of the word itself. It's like bread to butter, wasabi to sushi, or dulce de leche to pretty much anything. You could separate them, but life just wouldn't be worth living.
I would like to buy a hamburger.
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 When we speak a language, we need to pronounce words, right? It's not about whether you choose the right verbs or adjectives or put them in the right order. It's about whether you are actually saying those words correctly or not. Now, there are different levels to pronunciation. You've got the individual component sounds of the language that you've got to learn to pronounce correctly. Like in English, you've got to be able to say the as in this and th as in thanks. Then you've got to combine individual sounds into words, which isn't always straightforward. Take the word deliberately, for example. It's not deliberately, is it? It's deliberately. You've got to know the individual sound units, but also how they combine together to make words. And then lastly, at the level of the sentence, do you go up or do you go down? This all falls into pronunciation and then eventually becomes a question of accent, where native speakers from different parts of the same country, sometimes just down the road, will pronounce stuff in a different way. Then it's not a question of right or wrong, it's just different.
Now let's talk about the Japanese R sound really quick. I'd say it's a combination of 70% R, 20% L, and then maybe 10% D, da, di, do, de, and do.
Thing is, when you learned your first language, your brain made a set of unconscious rules about what letters should sound like, and your mouth muscles got the memo too. So it's pretty hard to break that training when you learn a foreign language later in life. Know why Japanese people have a hard time saying r? Well, in Japanese, the English sounds r and l don't even exist, so they can't even hear the difference. And other languages around the world do all sorts of fascinating things to show their uniqueness. I'm trying to uncover them one by one on this channel. So if you want a scintillating, gold-dusted deep dive into the language of your choice, well, keep tuning in. In fact, here is a great one to get you started.